Thank you for joining us for another episode of Senior Answers. My name is Maria Madrid, Director of Latino Services at the Colorado Gerontological Society. Today we bring you episode 2 of Elder Abuse. Our guest, Pat Cook from the Colorado Gerontological Society, will provide us with important information on sexual assault, physical abuse, and domestic violence. Thank you, Pat, for being here. Let's dive into this important information.
Thanks, Maria, for getting us started and the introduction. So in part one, we discussed some relevant federal laws and state statutes in general on the major topic of what is elder abuse. We also started working on what is a mandatory reporter, and then some of the evolution of the laws. CGS has been involved since day one, when the original legislation started in 2015, and Jefferson County led the charge, and then Larimer came in, and then finally Denver. And we've been part of the forensic team for about 7 years now, and we get to see some of the worst cases, but we also have some wins in behalf of seniors. So last session, we talked a little bit about the investigation process, and we really concentrated on the early parts of financial exploitation. Financial exploitation in the U.S. is over $5 billion per year and growing in leaps and bounds. I probably get 3 to 5 emails on the federal and state level a month talking about some of the scams that are going on and attacking the older adult. So some good news is we are now, all states are finally up and at least have a baseline equability. We have a few states that are dragging their feet on it, and I kind of understand because of the time and the money it costs, but at least we're up and running. So there's statutes, they mirror the federal statutes, and they work on physical abuse, financial exploitation, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, and abandonment. In our state, psychological abuse is rolled into the other abuses. It is not a standalone, though there is being some conversations around that topic. So I want to kind of do a little bit of review on some things on financial. So we're seeing an uptick, and one of the new situations is unemployment claims made on senior Social Security numbers, and seniors that may have worked in a small business or worked in a larger business and their information got out. One case that happened earlier this year ended up going to the grand jury for the federal government because it involved a company that was very large. It had multiple reports from senior Social Security numbers on their system that were people that never worked for them. The perpetrator turned out to be an ex-employee, and so it was sent back to the state, and he pleaded out guilty, and he's been in medium security. Unfortunately, this does not get enough news to keep others from trying. So back in 2018, this was when we started formalizing really what we were going to do on elder abuse. And so the big things, again, that we were working on was developing the terminology that would be global for the whole state and be easily interpreted and understood in each layer of government. So just developmental disabilities started etching out how many folks in the DD and the IDD market have been taken advantage of. And so a lot of discussion back in 2018 of what we were going to do to protect and support that population of people in Colorado. Yesterday, I attended a couple-hour seminar testimony with government agency from the same two communities and fraud and situations that have happened to them within the last year. So unfortunately, we're not on top of it in my feeling of satisfaction, but we continue to work on it. So right now in the statistics, we know that about 51% of at-risk adults that Adult Protective Services has intervened with or had information or conversations with have had multiple conditions. It's just not one thing, it's multiple things that come. So the annual report was published. And unfortunately, we are not on real time. Though I do believe by the end of March, we will have the 2021 report out, but I did give you the jump to look at how it's set up and the conversations. They are very transparent and forthright in their reporting, and the what has come down from the federal government in protecting people's rights, including seniors, and what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do in their intervention until the situation is so, what's a good word for it, in such a high jeopardy that they have to get in and dive in a lot deeper. So one of the statements that might help you understand APS's role is they identify risk factors, and they have a major intake protocol these days. And they investigate, and it's a quality management tool from Six Sigma that they use. And then they look at what's the mistreatment of the client, how are they safe, and if they're not safe, why not, and what are the opportunities to support them or help them get back to a safe space. So as I said earlier on, it costs a lot. In 19 and 20, we spent $20.2 million. And it broke out in these areas. So we spent about $1 million on salaries. We spent $355,000 on a new database called CAPS that I'll talk about in a little bit. We spent $17 million on county levels. 800,000 went to client services. A lot of that was getting people into safe hotels and housing, getting them fed, getting sometimes just as simple as buying clothes and toiletries and that type of thing because they lost everything. And then other times it would be, we have paid in, at least in Denver, to help with emergency money for food and utilities and stuff because people's money was taken from them. They couldn't pay their bills. So the other thing that was interesting is in 19 and 20, our first year for doing pre-employment screening cost us $444,000. When CAPS originally was introduced, they didn't think they would have 20 to 30 requests per month, and they were getting that per day. So CAPS is a really great tool, but it definitely caught the state short-sighted in what they thought was going to work. So some other interesting things to notice of is that women comprise about 58% of the cases and men about 42%. And of all the cases in Colorado that fall in this area, 70% of them are over 70. 40% of that group live alone. 48% of them actually live in long-term care of some sort or another. And dementia is the leading medical condition. So remember, dementia is not a mental health condition. It is a medical condition. And so about 60% of them suffer from dementia, as well as other chronic disease and frailty. Some of the most chronic, frail diseases that we see is lung disease, such as COPD, heart disease, such as congestive heart failure, bone disease, such as osteoporosis, cancers, diabetes, number one. We're seeing diabetes really shake a leg during COVID. And other things that people suffer with. In Colorado, we have a very interesting specialty area, which we have low thyroid. And low thyroid contributes in women, especially over 70, to a lot of other diseases. So hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism in younger women are part of our medical frailty that impacts people's decision trees. So one case that we were involved in was actually in Aurora, and the caregiver was going around and getting private contracts on vulnerable seniors in the area. Was it getting them to sign the properties over? And then she had this caregiving team that went and pretended that they really liked the people and was taking care of them, when in reality they were robbing them pretty blind and taking their property and their money. Care was extremely substandard. And finally, she was caught and was prosecuted, and she got a very long sentence. So some of the penalties and thefts is the big thing is that number one, they have to determine, were you in a position of trust? And then if so, not only are you fined on other statutes, but you're fined in the elder abuse statutes. And the second piece of it is if the theft has to be in the elder's presence. And the third is, did you use force, threat, or intimidation? I can tell you from the work that we've been involved in over these years, more of it is from intimidation than anything else. So it could be a small sentence from 4 to 12 years in prison with a fine, and you have to pay it all back before you get your privileges back and get off for probation. Unfortunately, because the prisons were so loaded with COVID, a lot of people got early discharges and they went right back to what they were doing. So we've seen several of those cases in the last 6 months. If it's less than 500, even though they can get a prison sign, they usually get the fine, and they income and everything is taken from them until that fine is paid off. And then if it has that coupling where force, threat, or intimidation, the fines double up and prison sentences are enforced. And we had one of those in January here in Denver, and Jane, the DA for Denver, was able to get the maximum sentence. As I said before, we're seeing some employment fraud. And this is a case where a gentleman owned a business. His mother worked at the store every day. She never got paid. But when the unemployment came available to apply, among other things that he could apply for, he applied in his mother's behalf, and that came to light. And so that case is still in litigation. So financial exploitation, as we talked about in the last session, is big, and most of it's property, personal possessions, or things like 401ks, stocks and bonds, just some really, really tough stuff. So the penalties have gone up, and to make it a little bit harder. And one of the things that they are really reviewing right now is the nursing home industry, and seeing all the financial exploitation that has happened to people that families and lawyers have taken assets and rediverted them so that they could become Medicaid eligible. And so that unfortunately, I think that will be more in the news in the next few months. So today I want to look at some of the other issues that we deal with in Colorado. And we're going to look at these 3 areas. So physical abuse does happen, and it's more common than you would think. And unfortunately, a lot of the elders that are still in this circle have been part of domestic violence a great deal of their life, and they didn't know that there was help or that they could change their situation. And so for a while, things calmed down. Where I have seen it the most is when one or the other partner starts having more and more aggressive dementia behaviors, and people don't know how to get help for them, or they try to get help. And because, again, we treat dementia as a medical condition, it's very hard. We don't have enough specialists who work in this arena. And so they get aggressive and they hit the very people they love because they have a lot of delusions that have come along with the dementia. So I've found this quick response code. I just thought that was so darn cute. And this is, again, some more information that I hope you'll take some time and look at. So sexual assault, we have seen that in some of our dementia care communities, some of our assisted livings, some of our apartment buildings where a congregate of seniors live together. And it has been charged as a class 4 felony. And we've actually had women charged as well as men in some of these cases. So this statute has been worked on in 19 and 20. So it's also known as a sex crime. So there is another set of laws that goes with it. And when these are prosecuted, they often use both groups. So the penalty for sexual assault on an elder can be up to 24 years in prison. And again, if it's intimidation, force, or threat, it can be coupled with other state laws. And so the prison sentence is sometimes used, but most of the time they're actually using some new methodologies and trying to get treatment for the perpetrators, along with the fines. One thing Colorado's been strong on is making sure that the fines are paid. So an example that we had in Denver, we had an older disabled woman living in a building, and she met a street person who conned her into her life, and she gave him things that her money, food. She let him stay at her apartment. Then he sexually got involved with her, and he intercepted her money, took her down to Social Security and talked them into being her rep payee, and then started applying for state benefits, saying that he was doing all this care for her, and the reality was that she was getting a fast food meal once a day at best. Then what he did when the money wasn't enough to help him take care of his habits, he started putting her on the streets for sexual favors. The building manager worked like months on trying to get the police and APS to even take the case seriously. And this was back in 18. In late 19, we got the police engaged in it, and they started surveilling this guy. And it became really clear that he was prostituting her and pimping her. When it became clear to him that he was being followed and that he was getting in deep hot water, he quit paying her rent, and he took off with quite a bit of her valuables. Her mother had passed, and she had jewelry and stuff like that that had a lot of values. So the tenants in that building actually fed her, did her laundry, cleaned up her apartment, took care of her while the case was being investigated. Eventually, the guy was picked up, and she lost her apartment. The eviction court allowed her to be evicted for because she hadn't paid rent in God knows like 10 months or so. And unfortunately, she was sent back to go with a family member who started this whole ball game in the very beginning. And this is where we lost. All her possessions was put on the street, and I don't know how the information got out, but it was like a horde of bees came over all her possessions that were put out by the sheriff's department that day. So this case actually prompted a lot of work that was done in 19 to make some improvements in this area. So as I said before, domestic violence has really increased. So some of the root causes for domestic violence in COVID that's already been published, and you'll see here on this slide that you can actually go read an article. It won't take you very long, but it's kind of the beginning of this discussion of what COVID did and to destabilize domestic violence. But the topics were loss of financial stability. A lot of seniors had adult kids move back in with them because they lost their apartments and jobs. Adult days were closing, transportation decreased, home care decreased, so the intervention of other people being in people's lives went way down. And some of these same people that were vulnerable were not up on the internet either by smartphones or tablets. And so, we did not close that gap as sufficiently as we still need to do. And then the whole discussions of isolation and community loss, including whether they quit going to church or going out to VOA lunches or going to community events, going to the library. Many things are still closed to them, and isolation is a true increase in domestic violence. We have seen this from partners. We have seen this come out of adult children. We've seen this come out of grandkids, and then people because they have huge hearts. That population of people have incredible hearts, and they've let homeless stay in their yards, in their garages, in their sheds. We've seen a lot of different things throughout the state. So one of the things that's interesting in the article, they talk a lot about the fear. And so not only were the older adults scared to death of what COVID really meant, and some of them lost family members to it, and that even made them more scared, but their own anxiety, their normal anxieties increased significantly. So they handled life less and less. I know for the last 6 weeks, the calls that are coming in our office, people don't have one thing that they're really needing to clean up. They have multiple things, and their anxiety is extremely high. So the Colorado Coalition for Domestic Violence, this is a great phone number. So they reframed themselves. They're called Violence Free Colorado. And so I put this website up. I hope you will bookmark this. You may never know when you need to use it. They've been great partners. They have done simple little things like change locks and put light bulbs where the perpetrators have broken the porch light bulb so the senior can't see who's at the door. And I don't know why they answer it when they can't see, but they have. And they push their way in. That happened just last week, where two people went in, pushed their way into a senior's house who did not lock their front door, and caused a great deal of physical and grief and robbed them, among a few other things. So Violence Free Colorado is really working hard on domestic violence for all age groups, and they're part of our statewide initiative now. We're seeing gun violence. Unfortunately, we've had 3 situations in the assisted living world in the last 8 months of gun violence. The last one concluded in a senior with severe dementia and anxiety who had a delusional period break through into a case that was his father's or grandfather's gun way back, really old, and it was on display. It hadn't been fired in God knows when. Unfortunately, there was 1 bullet in the chamber. He broke through the case, got the gun, and then killed a worker in the building. So this is prompting nationwide discussion, and we're not the only state that's had it. And this is a new sign that I encourage you, if you're in the assisted living world, please order this sign and put it at all your door entrances. So no open arms. There's also another one that says open or concealed. You do need to make sure your policies, your house rules, your service agreements, and people understand that it's zero tolerance for carrying a gun or any sort of weapon within the community. So in January, Paul Payson, who's part of the work that's being done in the groups I sit in, said domestic violence calls went up over 40%. And there was over 1,000 in 2020 in folks that are 70 and older. And so he says it's extremely draining to his staff. And the 4 or 5 detectives that work in this area have really gotten a lot of education around all of this, but we still struggle trying to figure out when is it an APS issue, when is it a police action issue, when is it a dementia issue, and then, people's right to pretty much throw everybody out and continue life as they've done for years and years and years. So in 19, we did some updates, and one of them was that we got rid of that thing that you had to opt in, because victims frequently in all level, whether it's domestic violence, senior abuse, child abuse, whatever, rarely will opt in. So that has gone away, but the information out in the community is that you have to agree to it. You do not have to agree to it. So people in adult protective services or police or detective systems actually have the right, and the courts have the right to override that. And so a lot of times when I've gone to court with older adult women, usually, they are scared of losing their son because that's the only person in their life. And that's generally the biggest fear that they have, is then they're going to really be alone. The other thing that we improved on was the notification process. So if there's any physical abuse against anybody or sexual abuse and they're released from jail, the system is required to notify the parties, and that has helped them make good decisions. What we have done in Denver, we're really proactive on this, and I believe El Paso is as well, is getting those do not contact orders in place, and then having the second hearing. And actually the victims advocates pick up people and take them to court when the courts were open, or attend with them on Zoom to help them through that, because frequently they would stall and they wouldn't show up, and then the court orders would be vacated. So we still need a little more cleanup in this area. There's some work being done. I hope that some legislation will be introduced, if it doesn't get done this year, next year, to strengthen this up a little bit more. So I want to talk a little bit about the process. So as I said, you don't have to opt in. You get some notifications, you are updated, you're able by a PIN number to go into the court records to know where the case is and stay in the know with justice. Police departments, when people call the police department, even on the non-emergency number, they are able to give a PIN number, and it puts them to the right detective if they forgot who the detective is, to be informed. So information is really important. We've had a few cold cases, if you've paid attention in the news, some cold cases that have came because the community read about him, then remembered about him, and then recognized that this might have been the person that actually created the situation. And so we've had some cold cases come forward and be prosecuted in the last few months that I would say 2 years ago would not have happened. The other thing I want to bring your attention to is called the Colorado Victims' Right Act. So the Supreme Court to the local courts all have victim rights laws and directives that they have to honor, and they're not allowed to put them in a closet or ignore them or play politics with them, anything. And so these are the subject matters, and this is the statute, and it has helped us a lot, especially with sexual assault against women, and then sex trafficking or human trafficking, as we're starting to see a very high uptick in that. So I want to share with you some of the victim advocate information area, depending on where you live. So this is Denver, probably super robust. There's a lot of people that feed into the team, and the people that work in it, actually our victims advocates, are extremely devoted, well educated, and do a great job. And I interface with two of them that work in older adult issues, and we talk a lot and try to figure out together how to solve some of the issues, whether it's social or economic, or whether we need to apply for benefits, or how we're going to deal with housing, which has been one of our headaches. And we work together. So Denver's team is really, really good. Fort Collins is also very good, and this is how to get hold of their victim advocate staff. I worked with them in the last month on a case of a man, and with their help, we were able to get him into a safe zone and get some interventions going and getting evaluated for capacity. So this group is well educated and dedicated as well. In Grand Junction, Tracy is over there. She has been doing this for quite a while, and she works in the sheriff's department, and she manages the volunteer staff. She is a specialist in trauma, and so she is very adept to working with their culture and their way of life in that side of the state. She does a lot of work also with teenagers and kids as well, and has volunteers that work on that. So one of the things about Tracy, she knows the community quite well and can help get people to the right subgroups for support. Elizabeth is in El Paso in Weld County. She's also with the Sheriff Department. And again, she has been there for a while, does a great job with this. She understands it, and she works in different age groups, not just in elder age groups, but she has partners that can support and do the investigation and make sure that people have what they need. In Southern Colorado, they don't have enough volume for each county to have one, so they developed a coalition, and it's called the Southern Colorado Crisis Team. This is a newer program. It has grown. All parts of Colorado now have to deal with this. This is not just a Denver thing or a Front Range thing or a poor people's thing. This is a statewide issue that we have all of this going on. And so down there, I have not interfaced with this group, though they have attended a couple of our state meetings. So in Colorado, we have an organization that works for victims assistance and education. And so again, I gave you the website so that you can visit them and see what they do and have them in your repertoire of information. So some penalties back in 2018. In these three areas is, again, these crimes are coupled with statutes that are on the books already, and then there's additional fines or building fines based on the exploitation of a intellectual, disabled, or an elder adult. So the investigation process, they have to look at the nature of the crime and the purpose of the crime, whether it was a passionate crime or was it an exploitation crime. I know some of the work that we do in our group, we sure see meth as one of the root causes of why family members, constantly go back and back and back to this elder to get money to support that habit. These folks, even though they are not employees, or are they in law enforcement or nursing, healthcare, all that, they're still in that position of trust as a family member. And so that terminology is used in the hearings and in the laws. If there is, in addition to any physical abuse, there is a robbery or theft, which frequently happens, the value of the item is put into this. And so the ones that I showed you early on in the education and this, they're coupled together. So like I said, the prison system's changing in that world, but the fines are not going away. So I want to talk about the different degrees of assault. So first degree assault, as you see, can be a $5,000 to $10,000 fine, or $1 million fine, excuse me. And if the assault is in a heat of passion, it could be reduced. But if it is coupled with other things, it can go up. Prison sentences or halfway houses or other justice reforms that are being done can go on for many, many years. In second degree, if it's evaluated to fit in this, the fines are less, but they also, again, it can be coupled to a heat of passion, and then it can be reassessed onto how it is, how the judge has the right to decide where it's going to sit, or the jury. In third degree, this happens intermittently. We don't get them in our group because I think they're settled, before they ever climb up the ladder. And so, again, a lot of, they might be sent to anger management. They might be sent to other work that's done to meet the criteria to stay out of prison and have to pay their fines off. And so, frequently, it is related to family members who have lost it with their parent and don't know how to handle the emotion. We've had some robberies increasing, and so stealing of purses at bus stops, knocking people down coming out of the store or the bank. I know that in some of our banks where there's a lot of seniors, they've actually positioned a guard to walk from the bank to the car with the senior. And the banks have done that themselves. They weren't asked to, but that helped decrease some of the robbery situations that we were seeing. We've also seen seniors robbed in parks, in Walmarts. We had a case here in Denver where the lady was shopping, had her purse in the cart, had it open. The guy knocked her down, took her purse, dumped all this stuff out, scrambled with her wallet. Unfortunately, unfortunately for him, the guard was at the front door, was a big guy, and he flattened him. But he did get a good size sentence, and he did have a major fine to pay. She fractured her hip, had a concussion, and a broken shoulder. So how are we doing, Colorado? Well, I'm happy in a lot of ways. I've been involved in this, like I said, from the beginning in 15, and we were 47th in the country to even talk about it. When I got involved originally, and this was out in Jefferson County, I was pretty shocked that we had not done anything and didn't want to do anything. And so we pushed through. We have moved up to 37th. And the three areas that are national topics is prevalence, resources, and protection. So we're still 43rd in prevalence. That means we have way too many cases. We have moved into the middle. We're 16th in resources. And so Rhode Island right now is the one that has the best resources per capita. And we're moving slowly but surely up. We're doing 2 new projects for 21 that I think will help us move up the ladder. I'm very hopeful. Denver has joined with New York, and we're looking at some best practices and some measures to even improve our processes in our interfacing. And then we're number 11 now in protection. So Washington State has the best laws and seem to set the stage for the whole country. Their crime rates have went way down. Washington, way back, used to be a private prison state for a great deal of the Western states, sent their prisoners to Washington State. They started recognizing that the private system was not a good system, so they got rid of it. Colorado is in the middle of getting rid of it. And so again, the whole country, we're kind of in reform and justice, and it'll be interesting to see how we do in elder care as this continues to evolve. So are we improving? In my opinion, yes. In some other people's, they're a little nervous, especially around the gun issues. And so one of the community statements that was put out just recently was that we need to continue to work very carefully about gun laws. As you saw in Washington on January 6th, that situation got totally out of control. We also had the situation in downtown Denver get out of control when it should have been a peaceful march turned into chaos. And so, and other parts of the country as well. So it's not that it's anti-gun, but it's preventative measures to make sure that the community and all people or victims are safe. Should you need more help, these are other offices besides us that are able to talk to you and help you walk it out. We will be doing another session. I'm going to be doing neglect. We'll be filming that here in the next 10 days. And then we decided to add a fourth series to this. And I'll be talking about how to present your facts and your concerns in a methodological way. I put today in the tools, a tool that I devised for communities, how to gather the information so they could have it right in front of them, because it's kind of intimidating when you're talking to a police officer or a detective. And when you have all that information in front of you, it breaks down that barrier, and then you can have a real conversation instead of a stressed out conversation. All the DA offices, the large DA offices in all the big counties, remember, they have their adult victims teams. They also have a navigator in each of their offices to help the public and agencies that are reporting sometimes work through details. That's a very positive move, and I hope we can continue to afford the navigators. The crisis line, if your staff is involved in any of the domestic violence, sexual assault, any of that, and they need to start someplace, sometimes the crisis line's a good front door. So please make sure that your staff knows this exists. You can order cards. They have how to text. The young people like the texting. I struggle through it, but it's another way to meet the needs of the different populations and the different age groups. So let's look a little bit about if you're a facility and the process. So first, you're identifying the issue. You may not have all the details, but you've got a pretty good idea there is something going on and it is incorrect and that it needs to be investigated. Get together and using the tool that I've given you and some more discussion in March, collect your information and get your head around it so that it's not I think, but this is what we know and this is what we've seen. And documents, those are legal documents. So anything that has a bias or the word I think in it, you need to take it out of there. It's only the facts. You will be notifying the police first because that's how it's set up. The police notify APS. If you call your Adult Protective Service in the county, you will hear a recording that says, if you think you have had this, please call the police department and start the report there. APS got, in the first year that this all came out, they were getting so many calls they couldn't keep up. So went back to more of a logic flow. Let the police do the work they do really well, which is to investigate and break it down into parts. And then they share with APS by statute, and they each all now have teams to how to do that, whether it's the police department or the sheriff department. You'll also notice in the documents that Maria is putting there for you, a listing for the whole state of all of those entities so that you can have that in a place that you can find it. Please document carefully your results, who you call. When I call in to a police department or sheriff department, and whoever takes the call, I ask them for their identification number so that I can log that in of who I started the report with and any other subsequent calls from that. That really helps make a difference on getting all the information collated and in the right place. That information goes to the district attorney or whoever's been assigned to follow the case, and they use it as part of their evidence gathering. So we want to make sure that in all of these areas that we've talked about, that we are protecting our residents, because as in assisted living, nursing homes, group homes, whatever you're doing, home health, whatever it is, we always want to protect our residents and divert behaviors and train the staff. And so when you're doing this, because if this does occur in a facility, you do have to do an occurrence report. One of the things they'll ask you is, what was your staff training? And they'll want to see validation of that. It's also now, COVID's settled down enough that I think we can get back on the horse. So part of the work that we're doing as an agency for the community is talking and bringing back quality management planning and getting it back in process. And so this is one of the policies, your elder abuse policy, your occurrence policy, and your documentation policy for how you document an incident or an occurrence. You need to crosswalk those policies and validate them against the different guidelines, and make sure that you've got the right tools in place, make sure you've got the training in place, make sure that your residents understand in resident rights that they have the right to report, and that families understand that what elder abuse is about in resident rights. And so those are the areas that I think we can all improve on and do a better job. One of the things is that be very observant of your staff on how they speak to your residents, terminologies they use, those types of things. We've heard some pretty despairing comments made towards seniors by younger adults and calling them names, and a lot of bias right now going on because of the culture of our country and where we are at the moment. So thank you for coming today. When we will be, like I said, recording another session in the next couple of weeks, and it'll be out for you. We'll be covering neglect. We'll be talking about some of the ethical discussions. I want to review how to use CAPS. And then I also want to talk about the federal watchdog, the Office of the Inspector General, and the work they're doing, because they have been pretty inundated at their workload, and the amount of fraud that is going on in the professional and the companies and insurance and health insurance and Medicare and Medicaid, all kinds of stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about them. So again, if you need to talk to us, Maria has the Hispanic line. She can also guide you over. You can call me, you can call the main number, visit our website. Please make sure that you are a current member. We appreciate that very much. And thanks for attending today. And I'm going to hand this back over to Maria.
Thank you, Pat, for the important information. And just to clarify, my direct line, you do not have to be only Hispanic to be able to reach out to me. I am bilingual, so I take calls in Spanish too. Once again, Pat, thank you so much. All of the tools that Pat discussed in this episode, including this PowerPoint slide, will be available in the video's description. So make sure you check that out. We will record and post upcoming episodes soon. We hope this episode is of assistance to you. Thank you so much.